Good afternoon. I am Allison Kaplan, Director of Education here at the National First Ladies Library at the National First Ladies Historic Site at Canton, Ohio. And I want to welcome you to today's film discussion. Every month, we collaborate with Stark Library here in Canton, and we offer a National First Ladies Library curated documentary that's women-centric for people to screen on their system Hoopla. From what we hear, there have been some technical issues with Hoopla. So if you were unable after registering to access that link, we have been told by Stark Library that you should contact Dee at Stark Library. Her phone number is 330-458-3150. I also put that in the chat. So if you are unable to access the film in advance, do not worry. We aren't going to provide any spoilers for our film today. Toni Morrison's The Pieces I Am, which is an exquisitely beautiful film. I'm so excited to talk to our speaker today about it. It was just a joy to watch. The multiple times that I watched it, I really loved it. All of the imagery and the intelligent people that were interviewed. So I'm going to show you a preview of the film just to give you an idea in a second. But the contact info is in the chat, and I'll type it again as I'm queuing up the preview. I wanted to mention some upcoming programs that are happening. Our speaker has limited time because she is off to teach soon. So I just want to give you a few highlights and then encourage you to go to First Ladies on Facebook or on our website to check out more of the programs. We have a lot of amazing things for spring. For our next film, we are screening I Know a Woman Like That. On April 13th will be our discussion, and it is a great documentary about senior-aged women. It has some really amazing speakers. Gloria Steinem is featured in it among them. So I highly recommend that. On April 7th, our legacy lecture will be featuring Karen Dunak, who will be speaking on Jacqueline Kennedy and presidential image making, Kennedy's first 100 days in office, how they went, and how Jackie Kennedy helped to form those. And we also have a curator series talk coming up on April 15th. And we're going to have a guest curator from the Peabody Essex Museum who will be speaking about their exhibition, Made It, the Women Who Revolutionized Fashion. And we're hoping for heavy emphasis on Elizabeth Keckley, who you may have heard of before. She is the amazing African-American seamstress that worked with First Lady Lincoln. So we're super excited to hear more about those amazing dresses. And that's just sort of a preview of what is coming up. But as our speaker has some limited time today, I am going to attempt to share my screen. We'll watch a quick preview of the film, if I can get it up and going, and then we'll switch to our discussion today. And again, we'll share that link with you so you are able to access. Let's see here, share screen. Here we go.
My grandfather bragged all the time that he had read the Bible, and it was illegal in his life to read. Ultimately, I knew that words have power.
I wanted as many people who could hear my voice to understand the importance of her work. Get people to trust that, oh, this is something safe, and then bam, hit them with Toni Morrison.
One of the early reviews says she's got a great talent. One day she won't limit it to only writing about Black people. Like, really, it's limiting for her to write about Black people? People began to buy Toni Morrison, and then we began to teach her. And as a consequence, they had to pay attention.
You know, you'd sick unto death of being labeled a Black writer.
I prefer it.
Oh, I thought you probably were tired of it.
Well, I'm tired of people asking the question.
Oh, yes, of course.
I don't know where where this woman's energy came from to raise two kids, to bring other people of color to the party, and also write these novels.
Toni was an editor at Random House.
Navigating a white male world was not threatening. It wasn't even interesting. I was more interesting than they were. And I wasn't afraid to show it.
Suddenly, the Canon wasn't the private property of white male writers.
I throw this book across the room and then walk down the steps laughing. Like you read Toni and you cry, but you gotta laugh.
Texas Bureau of Corrections banned Paradise because it might incite a riot. And I thought, how powerful is that?
When Toni Morrison published Beloved, it was an extraordinary turning point. We can never think about slavery in the same way.
A friend of mine called me up early in the morning and said, Toni, you won the Nobel Prize. And I remember holding the phone thinking, she must be drunk.
Toni Morrison's work shows us through pain all the myriad ways we can come to love. That is what she does, with some words on a page.
And without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker today, who will be in discussion with me about the film. Dr. Marilyn Sanders Mobley is a professor of English and African American Studies at Case Western Reserve University. From 2009 to 2019, she served as the inaugural Vice President for Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity at Case. Her efforts have been recognized by the Commission of Economic Inclusion, Diversity, Inc., Who's Who in Black Cleveland, the Women of Color Foundation, and Insight into Diversity. Under her leadership at Case Western Reserve University, they have been recognized as a sustained dialogue campus for their cross-cultural excellence in facilitating dialogue. She is a member of the Leadership Cleveland Class of 2010 and a Board of Trustee member for the Cleveland Institute of Music, Cleveland Leadership Center, and Ohio Humanities Council. She's a former board member of the Cuyahoga County Public Library Foundation, and she currently serves on the advisory board of Women of Hope, a nonprofit devoted to assisting veterans and formerly incarcerated women with re-entering their communities. She serves 2 consecutive terms on the board of the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Ed, and currently serves as Vice President of Blacks in Management. The YWCA of Greater Cleveland named her a 2019 Women of Achievement, and in February 2020, she received the Sojourner Truth Award from George Mason University for her leadership, teaching, and scholarship in the academy at the intersection of race and gender. Prior to her appointment at Case, she served as provost at Bennett College for Women in Greensboro, North Carolina. She was associate provost for education programs and a tenured associate professor of English at George Mason University, where she was a faculty member for 19 years. Dr. Mobley founded the African American Studies program at George Mason and served as its first director for 6 years. She has taught at Howard University, Marygrove College, and Wayne State University. She has a PhD in English from Case Western Reserve University, a master's degree in English from NYU, and a bachelor's degree in English and education from Barnard College of Columbia University. A graduate of Harvard University Executive Leadership Program, she was admitted to Howard University School of Divinity in 2004, and she will begin seminary studies at the Anderson University School of Theology in January 2021. Dr. Mobley is a published author and Toni Morrison scholar whose first book, Folk Roots and Mythic Wings in Sarah Orne Jewett and Toni Morrison, The Cultural Function of Narrative, received a Toni Morrison Society Book Award and was one of the first cross-cultural studies on the Nobel-winning prize author. She served as president of the Toni Morrison Society and is a former vice chair of its advisory boards. Her teaching, research, and scholarship in literary studies, cultural studies, higher education have all focused on race, gender, class, social justice, diversity, and inclusion. She has consulted in these areas for more than 40 years and presented her research and scholarship at various conferences around the US. So we are really excited to have her, and I could go on and on. I also wanted to mention she is a licensed and ordained lay minister at Arlington Church of God in Akron. And she has a book in progress, Toni Morrison and the Geopoetics of Place. Race and belonging. So we are so excited to have Dr. Mobley here today. And I'm so sorry to cut off her bio, but I know that she has to go teach class in a little bit. And I wanted to give us enough time to talk. So I want to welcome Dr. Mobley here to speak with us, and we'll get started on our discussion.
Thank you so much, Allison, for inviting me, and thank you for the introduction. I'm so honored. As I said to you, anytime I get to talk about Toni Morrison is a good day.
And I wanted to just say this film was such an absolute joy to watch. Besides having a lot of footage of Toni, it has a lot of really great footage of lots of scholars and people who surrounded her, from Angela Davis to Hilton Als to Fran Lebowitz. Lots of amazing artwork and photography and music. So it's just really, really amazing. And I wanted to jump into a discussion thinking about one of the speakers in the film, Sonia Sanchez, who did such a great job of talking about the multifaceted world of Toni Morrison and being a reader of her books. Sometimes she said you want to hold it close to you, and sometimes you want to throw it down the stairs. So she speaks about returning to Toni Morrison again and again. And I wanted to ask you about that. Is there a particular Toni Morrison work that you, as a Toni Morrison scholar, return to constantly throughout your life and career?
Thank you for that question. It's ironic that that's your first question, because Sonia Sanchez is the first person I called when Toni Morrison died. And I just want to talk to her. I want to talk to someone who was even closer than I was to Toni Morrison. I wasn't as close as some people, even though I'd been to her home and, you know, traveled with her and all. I hadn't done it as much as some. So Sonia's the first person I spoke to, and I know that feeling. I would say it's probably 3 books. I think the question was 1, but it's probably 3. I return over and over again to The Bluest Eye, because it's the book that she really puts her stamp on her writing and talking about gender and race. And she just did it so well and so clear and such a powerful punch with that first novel. It's hard to believe it was her first novel. So I go back to it all the time. I go back to Sula quite a bit, because I love the way Sula deals with women's friendships. This is Women's History Month, and I love the way it deals with women's friendships. And there's a way that my students always love that book, because it talks about something women are familiar with, and that is having a close friend and your lives go down different roads. You know, I'm thinking of Robert Frost's, you know, poem about the road less traveled by. So one woman chooses a very traditional path and the other one chooses another kind of path toward college and comes back. And I just think it resonates with women. But my all-time favorite, I think, is Beloved. I come back to Beloved all the time. It just nails talking about enslavement. It nails talking about interiority, you know, a woman's interior life. And I think because we've never really in this country had the conversations around slavery, and most of us in the academy now say enslavement. And so there's just so much work you get done when you read Beloved. There's work you get done. There's feelings you have. I know what Sonia Sanchez meant. There were parts of the book that I put the book down. I just said, okay, that's enough. And then I would pick it back up and I say, okay, I gotta keep reading. And so I think Beloved is sometimes considered her hardest book, but it's the book that I return to. And I think, to be quite frank, since you mentioned it in my bio, I'm a minister. And because I'm a minister, I just love that you put a woman in the book who ministered to the enslaved community. She was unchurched, uncalled, stood on the authority of her faith, and ministered to the community. And so I go back to that book because she says the outside world cannot define you. You need to love yourself. And I always felt like during the period of enslavement, the Black community must have had people like Baby Suggs in that book. People who could say, I know this is hard. I know what you're going through seems to be an assault on your body, but I'm going to teach you how to love your body and how to love yourself. And so the way it treats motherhood, the way it treats the self, the way it gives credit to knowledge that had been discredited, it's just my all-time favorite book. I know it won the Pulitzer and, you know, she got the Nobel after it, but it really is such a powerfully written book. And I go back to it also because, you know, there are 3 iterations of it. There's the novel, there is Oprah Winfrey's film, which is a different version of the book. It's not the same. I used to tell my students, don't try me like that. You know, I know when you've read the book and when you've only seen the film. And then she wrote a libretto, Margaret, which is an opera about the main character in Beloved. So I go back to that book for all those reasons.
Can you speak a little bit more, since you're talking about Beloved, about Toni Morrison's approach to talking about slavery, especially when it comes to enslaved women? And the film talks a little bit about how that experience was so different than anything had been written before.
Yeah, well, you know, she came across the article about the real Margaret Garner when she was working on the Black Book. So I think it's always important to know that Toni Morrison began her writing career as an editor. And when she was an editor for the Black Book, which was published in 1973, the current edition of it actually has her name on it. The earlier edition didn't have her name on it. She's now written a foreword. But she discovered this newspaper clipping of a woman who, when based on the law, which said if a slave master knows about your disappearance, they can bring you back and bring you back into slavery. So she had escaped, was brought back because of the fugitive slave law, and she decided, I won't go back and I won't let my children go back. And she was successful in killing 1 child. And so I believe emotionally she put it down. I've heard her talk about, she wasn't thinking about slavery. It was too big. She felt all the books about it were too big. She felt the books about it were boring. And so she hadn't planned to write it. But somewhere in the 80s, she came back to this story, which is an actual historical moment in Ohio, between Ohio and Kentucky. The plantation was in Kentucky. She had escaped to Ohio. And actually the libretto was performed there at the Cincinnati Theater, and we went to see it and went to the place where it was. But in any event, she wanted to tell another part of slavery. She felt, with all credit due to people like Frederick Douglass, you never had a sense that people had an interior life. You never had a sense of what a woman's experience was like. And it's important that the novel tries to say, if your body is the site of production and reproduction, your body is the site of both things. You're to breed and you're to go back and work. And so Morrison wanted to know, well, what did you think about? What did you feel like day in, day out? In the novel, the mother has her milk taken, which is comparable to sexual assault. These young men who are part of the plantation feel like they can do that for sport. They take her breast milk. And so Morrison wanted to talk about the interior life of characters. And that's what you get with that book that you don't get with the slave narratives. The regular slave narratives, and I've actually written about this in an essay, the regular slave narratives tend to walk you through the process. You know, I was born and not knowing my mother or not knowing my father. And then, you know, I was beaten. And then I learned how to read and write. And then I escaped from the plantation. So it's a linear move. Morrison was not interested in that linear move. She was interested in more of a vertical move down into the internal life. What did you dream about? What did you feel? What were you afraid of? How did you show love? You know, it's called Beloved. So how did you show love during a period when you didn't own your own body, when a woman couldn't choose who she would marry and wasn't allowed to marry? She could be selected to mate with someone, but that's different. And so Morrison was trying to capture when all those kinds of assaults were happening to your body, to your sense of family, to your sense of community, how did you survive? And so that's what makes the book so powerful. She goes into the interior life, kind of the day-to-day thinking and feeling, and not just from a female perspective, but also from a male perspective. Paul D comes back and he starts saying, oh yeah, that plantation was called Sweet Home. We know it wasn't sweet and wasn't home either. And so just giving another perspective, because there have been so many untruths about slavery. And Morrison wanted to say that history needs to be told a different way. And the interior life of women and men and children during, you know, a horrendous period designed to suck the humanity out of you. She wanted to write about how do people remain human and what was their humanity like under that assault. It's a powerful book because it takes you into something we think we know. Oh yeah, slavery. You know, you hear people talk about now, oh yeah, there was slavery. And the book basically says, no, not so fast.
So as a follow-up, the early reception of Toni Morrison's work was sort of talked about her limiting herself by only talking about the Black experience. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that and how she dealt with that reception.
Well, I like the way the film shows a couple interviews. You know, the film shows a couple interviews she had with Charlie Rose, and there were lots of interviews over the years. She just gave so many. The book I'm working on now, every time I think I've seen all the interviews, I see another one because she was always giving them. But she didn't like that assessment that it was limiting. And she actually found that assessment to be a racist assessment. You know, and she used to help people think about it from another perspective. Is James Joyce considered limiting because he talks about, you know, Irish people? You know, no, you know, is anyone limited because they talk about the community from which they're from? And her point was, we don't even do that when we're talking about white writers. We don't ask Hemingway, well, when are you going to, we didn't ask Hemingway, well, when are you going to write about Black people? She does in her book, Playing in the Dark, talk about how often Black characters were talked about in white authors' books, and not just Faulkner, which is the obvious one. But she was interested in how that question made it appear that to talk about her own community and to talk about her own people was not interesting, was not important, and was not equally valuable for understanding our country. So she considered that an insult of high proportion. And there was one critic early on who said, well, when is she going to put white people in her books? And the reality is they are in her books, but that's not her focus, you know. And part of what she wanted to do was write the book she said had not been written yet. And she began to write them herself. And I've heard her give that advice to writers and to students. You know, if there's something you want to read, go ahead and write it. And so she wanted to begin writing so that Black people were at the center, not always peripheral, not always kind of taken for granted and in the background, but at the center, because that's what had been missing in the literature she had read, the literature I was brought up on. Black people were not at the center. We didn't see ourselves represented, didn't see what we knew was important, what was valuable about our lives. It wasn't even represented, or it was trivialized. So she considered that critique an insult. Very much, there's another way it is sometimes framed. Sometimes it's framed as, when are you going to be more universal? And she always hears that as, oh, so when are you going to be more acceptable to white people? And her her focus was on writing to and for Black people. And she was delighted that the way she used language, the way she used narrative, always invited everybody in, everybody come on in. But in terms of who her audience was, she was trying to write toward an audience that she knew was hungry to see itself represented in literature and represented in all its complexity and nuance, not represented one way. Oh, you need a Black character? Okay, the Black character is going to do this. She was defying all of that. She was writing all the nuances and not always painting people on such a pretty picture. I mean, some people don't like what happens in the bluest eye, don't like the representation of race that's in the bluest eye, but it's a very complex representation. So if you only focus on one thing, you might find one thing to be upset about, but she's actually giving you more.
Can you talk about the white gaze? The film talks about the white gaze and Toni Morrison and how she attempts to sidestep the white gaze or how she deals with it in her novels.
Yeah, she actually quotes James Baldwin about this, who right after this interview, I'm teaching my course on Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, and Ta-Nehisi Coates on race in America. And so she talks about, she mentions it in the film, that James Baldwin said many writers wrote as if there was a little white person on their shoulder authorizing them, to say and to edit their work a particular way. And so she tried to write as if that were not important to her. And again, I think maybe it's a complicated idea, but she's trying to say she's aware that other people will read it, but she's not writing in such a way. The white gaze would say, you've got to write about your own community a certain way to explain to that person who's looking over your shoulder, to justify something about your community for the person who's going to watch it. And I think Morrison just wanted to defy that, wanted to write about the Black community in such a way that if white people got in, she was happy. If they didn't get in, they weren't the focus. And so writing outside of the white gaze or not being concerned about the white gaze, it's why you hear so many people say she wrote in an unapologetic way. She wrote things about the community that said, this is the community, we know this. I'll give you an example. The bluest eye starts with the language, quiet as it's kept. Now, it could be argued that a lot of people use that expression now, but early on, that was a Black vernacular expression. Quiet as it's kept meant there was a secret. And the person who said that was about to break the secret. They were about to tell something that had not been told. But Black people know that's Black speech. That's a Black vernacular. She doesn't really explain it. She just uses the expression and then you go on into the story and you kind of know you're getting ready to hear a taboo. Something's getting ready to be told that hadn't been told before. So there's a way she tried to write that says, I'm going to use language, I'm going to make references that are familiar to my community. I'm not going to write as if I've got to explain to people who are not familiar with it. And so the white gaze has to do with that, writing in a way that's acceptable to someone who's outside your community. There's another example in Sula that reminded me. I had a Japanese scholar friend who was visiting from Japan at Howard University, and he came around the Beltway when I was at George Mason. He wanted to talk to me, and he said, why isn't Toni Morrison interested in people like me who are critics? He was a critic. He said, why is she so interested in the translators? And I said, because if you use certain vernacular expressions like she does in Sula, eruptions of funk, I said, she wants to be sure that the translator got the language right before she goes into what the critic says. So I teased him. I said, so how do you say funk in Japanese? And he just smiled. He said, okay, I get it. So how that actually, I didn't have a copy of a translated work from from English to the Japanese, so I didn't know, but she's interested in that need to just go ahead and use the language of the community and not worry about who's going to get in, who's not going to get in, who understands it or not. And she was particularly interested in not writing the way she thought. She thought writers like even Richard Wright were writing to explain the Black community to white people. She didn't want to do that. You know, just think about it, you know, like you don't have to explain, when you're telling family stories, you don't have to explain all the nuances of how your family talks. But if an outsider is standing there, you might have to say, okay, well, my uncle means this when he says that, or my aunt means, you know, you don't want to, she didn't want to write that way. She wanted to write in an authentic voice that emerged, that was organic to the community.
I wanted to ask you about the canon. When Toni Morrison starts out at Howard University, there's this discussion in the film of a surprise that the literature that is approached there is part of this white canon. And I wanted to talk to you about how you thought the canon has changed since Toni Morrison was around. Just thinking of my own experiences in college in the 90s, there was still this canon that was particularly white and male, and that I had to read that before I could get to Toni Morrison. But I wanted to talk about this idea of like breaking the canon or bending it, and how Toni Morrison has impacted that.
That's a wonderful question. I would say that she, in concert with several writers, starting in the 70s, began challenging the canon. You know, I like to remind people late 60s, early 70s is when we got programs like African American Studies. On some campuses, it was Black Studies or Africana Studies or Pan-African Studies. Many campuses also began Women's Studies, Ethnic Studies. These programs were meant as interventions to disrupt the canon. And so I believe that started happening in the 70s, and she was part of it. You know, writers like Alice Walker were a part of it. Writers like Toni K. Bambara, who Toni Morrison edited, and Gail Jones, who she edited. You know, there were writers who were part of it. And so when you look at the curriculum in high school now, it's not at the level we would want, but there are other writers. There are Black writers. Toni Morrison is taught in many high schools across the country. Definitely you can read her in literature classes, in English departments at the college and university level. So I would say there have been challenges to the canon. People don't even consider it still to be the same canon that it was when I first came through back in the 60s. It's not the same canon. And yet it depends on the program you go to. I mean, there's something that happens sometimes where when you're reading American literature, you're still going to get primarily white authors. When you go to African American literature, then you'll read Black writers. I call myself a both and lady. And I think what we should be doing is both. People should get an opportunity to study and to concentrate on African American authors, and what is known as, quote, American literature needs to include the Black writers who have been a part of it. I mean, the whole idea of choosing a curriculum is a very nuanced, complicated thing, but I think there's changes happening. You know, I said years ago, just knowing that she was on the AP exam and just knowing she was on the SAT exam was evidence that the canon was changing, that you weren't going to see all white writers any longer. But that's fluid. You know, what's on the SAT test right now? Well, we're in a pandemic, I don't know. But I know that there were challenges to this notion of canon, and that she was part of it, along with several writers who we now read. As I said, the course I'm about to go to, we're reading Baldwin. You know, so there were many writers that began to get included. The work that I think of that represents the canon was the Norton Anthology. The Norton Anthology of American Literature began changing. If you purchase a Norton Anthology now, it is not all white writers. It just is not. So she was part of that change. And there grew an appetite for Black writers, just an emerging, growing appetite for Black writers.
Can you talk about Toni's career as a publisher and how that impacted her writing, and also how she balanced it all? Because she worked in publishing, she taught, she wrote, and she had 2 sons.
I know some people are surprised to learn she was a single mother, but she was divorced very early, so they were very young. Her two sons, Slade and Ford, were very young, and she had an example of her parents. You know, she knew that they had grown up not very well off, and so her parents worked very hard. So she was accustomed to watching people work hard and juggle more than one job. She says they were poor. And so I always had a feeling she was determined she was not going to be poor and that she was going to do her best. So as she says in the film, her family helped her. She got her first job with Random House and was editing, but juggling that with opportunities to teach. And so I think the combination of family and help and working more than one job is how she made it through. But what I like about the film is it documents how her co-editors, the other editors and those in charge at Random House, recognized her gift. She actually started writing The Bluest Eye when she was still at Howard University as an undergraduate student. And I think she just brought it back out and started working on it again. But I think the advantage of having been an editor first, I think, is that it gave her a meticulous eye for detail. It gave her great care with narrative and with language that she might not have had if she had not been an editor, and that she might not have had if she had not been an English professor. You know, so as an English professor, as a writer as a creative writer and someone teaching creative writing, she was grading people's papers. And so there's a way that combination of editing and grading gave her a keen sense for language and paying attention to detail and where does the comma go? Where does, you know, when is the end of this sentence? She has long sentences, but I think it gave her an appreciation for how language works and how narrative works. And after a point, you know, they basically said to her, you need to be writing. Her life as an editor, however, was really critical. And I share this with my students. It's very important that you know that when she was at that table as an editor, she made a difference. A lot of times we talk about diversity and inclusion. We say, you know, you need more women in a particular area, or you need more people of color. Well, it doesn't mean anything if that person sits there or goes along to get along. Toni Morrison didn't go along to get along as an editor. I know she probably ran across some conflict, but she got Angela Davis published. And so that was a difficult autobiography to get published. She worked with her and helped her shepherd that book through. She helped edit and got Muhammad Ali's book published. So I'm just convinced, had she not been at the table, there are some books that would not have seen the light of day. We may not have had John McCluskey's work. We may not have had Toni K. Bambara's work, or Angela Davis's book, or maybe somebody else would have published Muhammad Ali's book. But there was a way in which her attention to, these are voices that need to be heard. So being at that editor's table made a difference. And then I think being at the editor's table also made a difference. It made a difference for who we got to read as readers, but it also made a difference for her as a writer, because it gave her attention to language and detail and nuance. You know, while I'm working on my book, I went to Princeton last January, right before everything shut down. And I got to look at some of her notes, and the notes that she took when she was writing Beloved, they're just so meticulous. I mean, there are drawings, there are illustrations, it's like maps. I mean, she just paid attention to detail. And I can't help but think that earlier life as an editor prepared her to know something about how to write in a way that other people were not writing.
I wanted to ask you some more about the Black Book, because it was something that I wasn't really familiar with. And then it was fascinating to me as a historic document and the impact that had on African-American culture.
Oh my goodness. You know, I meant to bring, I have a copy, but I don't have it right here. Oh, I can't believe I didn't. I meant to have it here at my desk. Anyway, when that book came out in 1973, I was so happy. I mean, I remember just hugging the book and saying, here it is. It's an archive of a sort. The earlier introduction said, if Black people had kept a 300-year scrapbook, this is what it would look like. And scrapbook in every sense of the word. I mean, you don't get an index that would help you find everything, but it's everything from early pictures of slave ships to pictures of lynchings, to pictures of Black memorabilia, Negro baseball leagues, recipes, music, fashion. I mean, everything that you can think of is in that book, and it's like a huge scrapbook. It's a wonderful, as I say, it's a wonderful archive. She wrote an essay called The Site of Memory, and I would say the Black Book is a collection of those memories, different memories down through the years that Black people can go back to and say, I didn't live it, but I remember my grandparents talking about that. It's a very difficult book because it has, as I said, pictures of lynchings and pictures of what she discovered when she was writing Beloved, pictures of, I call it the apparatus of slavery, things that were used to keep a silent workforce. You know, at one point in the novel Beloved, she talks about putting a bit on someone. She discovers that idea of the bit when she was working on the Black Book. Can you imagine putting a bit on the tongue of a human being when bits are designed for horses? Chains and pictures of chains and coffles and those kinds of things are in there. So the earlier part of the book has, I would call it the remnants, the apparatus of how did the slavery machine work? How did the regime of, a whole regime of unpaid labor, how did it work? So you got evidence of it in the Black Book, but it doesn't stop there. And there's some scholarship that says our existence is not solely about the mid-Atlantic slave trade. That slavery was a huge, important piece of our history. But she tries to show some history actually before slavery, and she tries to show the history after. So during Reconstruction. So there are books, pictures of memorabilia about really negative memorabilia, minstrelsy. There's evidence in the book about what the whole menstrual period was about. What were some of the early textbooks? How were Black people represented in those books? So I recommend that people get a copy of it because there's a new edition out, and I bought 6 copies. I bought one for each of my sons. I wanted my grandsons to have a copy because it's important American history, but it's particularly important Black history. And sometimes the history that people are not that proud of or that pleased to look at, but there's a way that book, as an archive, you have to look at it head on and say that this is evidence of the positive dimensions of our existence in this country and the negative, the good, bad, the ugly.
I'm wondering if you would talk a little bit about one of the most joyful moments in the film was the talk of the celebration of the Nobel Prize win, and watching all of the journalists warm her, and then hearing from Fran Lebowitz about the experience of the party and all of the people who were engaged. What did that win mean for her, and what did it mean for the future of literature?
Oh, I love that second question. I think she had already been celebrated by the Black community, and she already knew that the writing she had done was important and meaningful. I think it was global validation at that point. From the world stage, she was validated in a way she had never been validated. And I think she enjoyed it. I think she loved it. I don't think she needed it. And yet, when she heard other writers saying, no, but you deserve to be acknowledged for your work, she knew that they were right. She knew had she been another writer, it may have come sooner or faster. So I think there was a way that validation just freed her up in a way to luxuriate in what she had begun to experience within the community. And I think it said, oh, outside the community, there is an appreciation of her work. And I just appreciate the Nobel lecture because as wonderful an opportunity as that was, as grand as it was, that lecture is the most powerful thing I've ever heard. And she took that global moment on a global stage to say, this is what is important. Language is what is important. Narrative is important. And what we do with it matters. And she basically says to the children in the story, it's in your hands. And she's saying to the global community, how we use language. And I think that lecture was so prophetic. So she didn't get on stage and give a short, nice, little short and sweet speech. She used that moment to say, there's something about what we've been doing with language is wrong. We are the stewards of language and we better get it right. And she says, for example, that language that is about violence is not just about violence. It is violent. And so I say the book is prophetic because we've now lived out the implication of words. So she was freed up to be herself, her true, authentic, unapologetic self in that moment. And she didn't back off from that moment to say, since I'm here, since I'm getting this award, I'm going to use this moment to say how powerful narrative is, how powerful our stories are, and how we've used language in some really nefarious ways. If we go back and look at our history as a human community, we have done some things with language we should not do. And yet she has the young people there. So it's an intergenerational moment. And I always felt like winning the Nobel Prize just freed her up to do some other things. She started an atelier program at Princeton, which was a way of bringing artists to campus. She brought Yo-Yo Ma to campus. She brought Bernice Johnson Reagan. I can't remember everyone, but she brought people to Princeton and gave students opportunities that they might not have had otherwise to work with an artist and to produce something on campus. So I think it freed up her imagination to get that award, but she wasn't limited by it. I mean, I love the point in the film where it's like, that's a big check. Well, what am I going to do with that? What am I going to do with all that money? She just never struck you as someone for whom getting that big check and having that much celebrity would go to her head. But Fran Lebowitz was correct. She did like a big party. I was president of the society when she turned 50. When she turned 70, when she turned 70. And we hosted it at the New York Public Library. And I'll never forget, at first we heard murmurings that, oh, she's not going to want to have a birthday party at the New York Public Library. And I said, yes, she does. And she wants it black tie. We had a 500-person black tie dinner, Gloria Steinem, Skip Gates, Oprah Winfrey. I mean, so I got to see, I didn't get to go to Stockholm, but I got to see how much she does love a party. And there's a picture in the video, in the film, there's a picture of her when she has that gray sash on and she's on the dance floor. That was her 70th birthday party when I was president. And she danced at that party with Amiri Baraka. So she does love a party, or she did. It's so hard for me to talk about her in the past tense. But I'm so grateful for this chance to talk about the film. I had seen the film twice. As soon as it came out, I bought it. And I saw it the third time right after she died. It's like I needed my own personal form of a wake. I watched it. I didn't let anybody else know I was doing it. It was just like a wake, a private wake to kind of grieve her loss. But I know for a fact that she loved the party. It freed her up. I think the award freed her up to be in her life a different way, continuing to write. I mean, she continued to write after that.
Well, Dr. Mobley, I don't want to keep you too much longer because I don't want to keep your students waiting, but I have two more questions for you.
Okay.
First of all, if there's someone who is new to Morrison's work, is there a starting novel or work that you recommend they choose first?
Wow. I believe it's The Bluest Eye. I think if you're getting introduced to a writer, it's always good to see how they began. That's just my personal opinion. If you didn't start with The Bluest Eye, I would say start with Sula. I wouldn't start with Beloved. Some people like to start with Beloved because that's the one they heard so much about, and there's a film. And but I think Beloved is really it's a challenging read, and it's a hard read. It's worth the read. You know, I think you'll have to start it and stop and start and stop, but it's worth the read. But I think The Bluest Eye is probably the best place, because The Bluest Eye is really coming out the gate, where she works on how does race operate in our culture, and what is a community that is under assault of race deal with. I mean, one of the things she deals with in The Bluest Eye is interior loathing, you know, self-loathing. Why would you not like yourself? Why would you want blue eyes if you're a Black girl? And so Morrison takes that on, this kind of desire to be something that you're not, because the whole culture, you're steeped in a culture that has made you hate people who look like you. Between home and school and the community not being affirmed, her attitude is, if people are engaged in self-loathing, she wanted to find out what it was like. She wasn't engaged in self-loathing. Poverty notwithstanding, she grew up in a family where she was taught that she was smart, that she was beautiful, that she was worthy. So self-loathing was foreign to her. She didn't even understand it. But she wrote The Bluest Eye to try to get into that, you know, into that concept. But I think people will appreciate The Bluest Eye for so many reasons. She takes on literacy. I mean, how it starts with, you know, Dick and Jane's stories. And because Morrison used to work in the library herself. In fact, there was a reading room in Lorain now named after her. Literacy has always been important to her. You know, she says in the film on a couple occasions, she realized how powerful language was. And so I think in The Bluest Eye, she's trying to share, when you're reading primers, when your first reading material does not look like you, demonizes your community, it's going to begin an early process, perhaps, unless you have people around you presenting a counter narrative and saying something different. It's going to create self-loathing. And so the way that book talks about race, and the way it talks about racism, the way it talks about white supremacy, it's just it's a good book. Still challenging, but but worth the read. I'm biased.
Last question for you. Are there any contemporary authors that you feel like are following in the footsteps of Toni Morrison?
Yeah, two that come to mind, partly because they've said it, are Colson Whitehead and Edwidge Dandekant. I would definitely say those two. Jesmyn Ward, I think also Tayeri Jones. Those are the ones that come to mind, and that I know from other colleagues. You know, we've been in places where we've heard them talk about kind of their indebtedness to Toni Morrison, you know. But their own way of using language shows that a little bit of influence in a positive sense.
Well, Dr. Mobley, I want to thank you so much for your time today and discussing Toni Morrison's film documentary with us. And I want to encourage anybody who's watching, if you did not get a chance to screen the film yet and you registered, please reach out to me and I will get you connected with the Stark Library. My apologies for any technical issues. But Dr. Mobley, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a really empowering, wonderful discussion. And I'm so excited for the day to end so I can get in bed with a Toni Morrison novel and just dig in. So thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for the excellent questions and for the opportunity. I enjoyed it.
Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. Have a great day.